I was folding laundry in my grandmother's attic when the church bell rang at exactly 9 p.m., and every single person in Millbrook stopped moving. I watched through the dusty window as my neighbors froze mid-step on the sidewalk below, as car engines died in the middle of the street, as even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then I heard it. A sound like nothing I had ever experienced before, a frequency so low it made my teeth ache and my vision blur at the edges. That was when I realized I had made a terrible mistake by arriving in this village after sunset, and an even worse one by not asking my grandmother why she had been so insistent that I arrive before dark. My name is Oberyn, and I'm 24 years old. What I am about to share with you might sound impossible, and I understand if you find it difficult to believe, but I need to tell this story because someone needs to know what happened in Millbrook and why you should never, ever visit that place between the hours of 9 p.m. and 10 p.m. If you have ever experienced something unexplainable in your own life, something that made you question everything you thought you knew about the world, I would love to hear about it in the comments below. Sometimes knowing that others have faced the unknown makes our own experiences feel a little less isolating. It started 3 weeks ago when my grandmother called me. She lived alone in Millbrook, a small village in rural Vermont that I had only visited twice in my childhood. The calls had become more frequent over the past month, but this one was different. Her voice carried an urgency that made my stomach clench. "Oberyn, you need to come visit me," she said without any preamble. "It has been too long, and there are things I need to tell you. Things about our family." I had been meaning to visit her for months, but work at the architectural firm in Boston had been demanding. I was finally up for a promotion, and the timing felt terrible, but something in her voice made me set aside my excuses. "Of course, Grandma. When would you like me to come?" "This weekend. But Oberyn, this is very important. You must arrive before sunset. Do you understand? Before the sun goes down completely." I laughed, thinking she was joking. "What happens after sunset? Do you turn into a pumpkin?" The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I thought we had been disconnected. When she finally spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. "Just promise me, Oberyn. Promise you will be here before dark." "I promise, Grandma." But promises, I have learned, are easy to make and much harder to keep. Friday afternoon arrived with a crisis at work. A client presentation went disastrously wrong, and I spent 3 hours trying to salvage the situation. By the time I left Boston, it was already 4:30 p.m. The drive to Millbrook took 4 hours on a good day, and with Friday traffic, I knew I was cutting it close. I should have called my grandmother to let her know I would be late. I should have stopped for the night at a hotel and driven up in the morning, but I was 24 and stubborn, and I convinced myself that arriving a little after dark would not matter. How wrong I was. The sun was a blood-red disk sinking below the tree line when I finally turned onto the narrow road that led to Millbrook. The GPS on my phone had lost signal 20 minutes earlier, but I remembered the way from my childhood visits. The forest pressed close on either side, ancient oaks and maples that seemed to lean toward the road as if trying to block my passage. I passed the weathered wooden sign that read, "Welcome to Millbrook, population 387, just as the last sliver of sun disappeared. The village looked exactly as I remembered it. A single main street, lined with old brick buildings, a small church with a white steeple, rows of houses with neat front yards and picket fences, but something felt different. Wrong. The streets were empty, not just quiet, but completely devoid of life. No cars moved along the road, no lights shone in windows. It was as if the entire village had been abandoned. My grandmother's house sat at the end of Maple Street, a 2-story Victorian with peeling blue paint and a wraparound porch. I pulled into the driveway, my headlights cutting through the gathering darkness. The house was dark too, every window black. I tried calling my grandmother as I walked up the front steps, but my phone showed no signal. The front door was unlocked, which did not surprise me. My grandmother had always been trusting, perhaps too trusting for her own good. "Grandma," I called out as I stepped into the foyer. "It is me, Oberyn." Silence greeted me. The house smelled of lavender and old books, familiar scents that should have been comforting but instead made me uneasy. I found a light switch and flipped it. Nothing happened. The power was out. Using my phone's flashlight, I made my way through the house. The living room was neat and tidy, exactly as my grandmother always kept it. Family photos lined the mantel above the fireplace, including several of me as a child. The kitchen was clean, a half-empty cup of tea sitting on the counter as if she had just stepped away, but my grandmother was nowhere to be found. I climbed the stairs to the second floor, calling her name. The floorboards creaked under my feet, each sound seeming unnaturally loud in the oppressive silence. I checked her bedroom, the guest room where I would be staying, even the bathroom. Empty. All empty. That was when I decided to check the attic. The pull-down stairs were in the hallway, and I had to drag a chair over to reach the cord. The ladder unfolded with a groan of protesting hinges. The attic was dusty and crowded with boxes, old furniture covered in white sheets, and stacks of yellowed newspapers. A single window at the far end let in the faint glow of streetlights. I spotted a basket of laundry sitting on top of an old trunk and figured my grandmother must have been up here doing some organizing before she left. That was when I made my fatal mistake. I decided to fold the laundry while I waited for her to return. It seemed like a nice gesture, something to help her out. I was 3 towels into the basket when the church bell began to ring. The sound was deep and resonant, each toll seeming to vibrate through my bones. I counted automatically. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 o'clock. I glanced out the attic window just as the 9th bell faded, and that was when I saw them freeze. A woman walking her dog on the sidewalk simply stopped mid-stride, 1 foot raised, frozen like a statue. A car rolling through the intersection halted instantly, not gradually slowing but stopping as if time itself had paused. Even the branches of the trees stopped swaying. My heart hammered against my ribs as I pressed my face to the dusty glass. What was happening? Was this some kind of town-wide drill? A prank? Then the sound began. It started so low, I felt it more than heard it, a vibration that seemed to emanate from the ground itself. It grew louder, higher, becoming an oscillating hum that made my teeth ache and my vision swim. I clapped my hands over my ears, but it did no good. The sound was everywhere, inside me, around me, passing through me like I was made of nothing but air. And then I saw them. They came from between the houses, from the shadows beneath the trees, from the darkness itself. Figures that were not quite solid, not quite transparent. They moved with an unnatural fluidity, gliding rather than walking, their forms shifting and wavering like heat mirages. I cannot adequately describe what they looked like. The human mind is not equipped to properly process something so fundamentally wrong. They were roughly humanoid in shape, but wrong in every detail. Too tall, too thin, their limbs bending at angles that should not have been possible. Where their faces should have been, there was only darkness, a void that seemed to swallow light. They moved among the frozen villagers, passing within inches of the paralyzed people. One of them stopped in front of the woman with the dog, leaning close as if examining her. The dog was frozen too, I realized. Everything living had stopped moving. Everything except me. Why was I not frozen like the others? The question burned in my mind, but I had no answer. I only knew that I needed to stay absolutely silent and absolutely still. Some primal instinct screamed at me that making any sound, drawing any attention, would be the end of me. I barely dared to breathe as I watched the figures drift through the streets below. There were dozens of them, maybe more. They seemed to be searching for something, their void faces turning this way and that. One of them stopped directly below my window. My blood turned to ice as it slowly tilted its head upward. I could not tell if it was looking at me, if it even had eyes to see with, but I felt its attention like a physical weight. For an eternal moment, we regarded each other across the darkness. Then, very slowly, very deliberately, it raised one impossibly long arm and pointed directly at the house. At me. I stumbled backward from the window, my foot catching on the laundry basket. It tipped over, and a towel tumbled out, hitting the floor with a soft thump that in the supernatural silence sounded like a thunderclap. Every figure in the street below turned in unison toward the house. Panic flooded through me, cold and sharp. I had to move, had to hide, had to do something. But where could I go? And how could I move without making noise? I forced myself to think rationally. I was in the attic. There was only one way down, the pull-down stairs. If those things came into the house, they would find me immediately. I needed another option. My eyes scanned the attic desperately and landed on an old wardrobe in the corner, one of those massive antique pieces that could probably fit 2 people. It was not much of a hiding place, but it was better than standing in the open. I moved toward it as slowly and carefully as I could manage, each step measured and deliberate. The old floorboards seemed determined to betray me, creaking softly with every bit of weight I placed on them. The sound felt like shouting in the oppressive silence. I reached the wardrobe and carefully, so carefully, pulled open the door. The hinges protested with a soft squeal that made me wince. Inside, I found old coats and dresses, smelling of mothballs and age. I slipped between them, pulling the door closed behind me until only a tiny crack remained. Through that crack, I watched the attic entrance. For a long moment, nothing happened. The unnatural hum continued, setting my teeth on edge. Then I heard it, a sound from downstairs. The front door opening, footsteps, if they could be called that, more like the whisper of cloth dragging across wood. They were inside the house. I held my breath, every muscle in my body tensed. The footsteps moved through the first floor, slow and methodical. I heard them in the living room, the kitchen, the dining room. They were searching. Just as I had searched for my grandmother earlier, the footsteps approached the stairs, started climbing. Each step seemed to take an eternity. I could track their progress by sound alone. 2nd stair, 5th stair, 10th stair. They reached the landing and moved down the hallway. I heard doors opening. My grandmother's bedroom, the guest room, the bathroom, then silence. Had they left? Had they somehow missed the attic entrance? The pull-down stairs groaned as something began to descend them. My heart stopped. I pressed myself as far back into the wardrobe as I could, burying myself in the old coats. Through the crack in the door, I saw a shape emerge from the attic entrance, one of the figures, pulling itself up into the space. It was worse up close. The wrongness of it was almost overwhelming. It moved like liquid, like smoke, like something that existed in more dimensions than I could perceive. The darkness where its face should have been was absolute, a void that seemed to pull at my vision, making me dizzy. It drifted across the attic floor, its attention on the tipped laundry basket. It bent down, impossibly far down, as if its spine did not exist. One long, skeletal hand reached out and touched the fallen towel. The moment it made contact, the towel disintegrated. It simply came apart, threads unraveling and turning to dust that scattered in a wind I could not feel. Terror like I had never known gripped me. If that thing touched me, I would end up the same way. Just dust on the floor of my grandmother's attic. The figure straightened, or rather flowed upward. Its void face swept across the attic, searching. It drifted toward a stack of boxes, and with a casual gesture, knocked them over. The boxes hit the floor with crashes that in the silence sounded deafening, but the figure did not seem to care about the noise it made. Only the living had to be silent, I realized. Only the living attracted them with sound. The figure moved closer to the wardrobe. 5 feet away. 4 feet. 3. I closed my eyes, unable to watch my own death approach. My mind raced with thoughts of everything I would never do, everyone I would never see again. My parents, who I had not called in 2 weeks, my friends in Boston, my grandmother, who had tried to warn me. The wardrobe door creaked. This was it. This was the end. But then, from somewhere in the distance, I heard another sound. The church bell, ringing again. A single toll that cut through the unnatural hum like a knife. The figure froze. Its void face turned toward the attic window. Then, with a speed that should not have been possible, it flowed across the attic and down through the entrance, disappearing as quickly as it had come. I waited, not daring to move, not daring to believe I was safe. The hum began to fade, growing quieter and quieter until it disappeared entirely. In its absence, the normal sounds of the world rushed back. The whisper of wind through trees, the distant bark of a dog, the hum of electricity as the power returned. I cautiously pushed open the wardrobe door and stumbled out, my legs shaking so badly I nearly fell. Through the attic window, I could see the street below. The villagers were moving again, the woman continuing her walk as if nothing had happened, the car rolling forward through the intersection. Everything had returned to normal, as if the last hour had never happened. But the fallen laundry basket and the pile of dust that had once been a towel told me it had been terrifyingly real. I do not remember climbing down from the attic. The next thing I clearly recall is standing in my grandmother's kitchen, gripping the counter so hard my knuckles were white. The cup of tea she had left was still there, still half full. The front door opened, and I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. My grandmother walked in, carrying a cloth shopping bag. She stopped when she saw me, her expression shifting from surprise to something else. Horror, guilt, sorrow. "Oberon," she whispered. "Oh, Oberon, you were supposed to be here before dark." I wanted to yell at her, to demand explanations, to ask her what in the name of everything holy was happening in this village. But when I opened my mouth, only one word came out: why? She set down her shopping bag and moved to the kitchen table, lowering herself into a chair as if she had aged a decade in the last hour. "Sit down, child. I owe you the truth, even though the truth is something that should never be spoken aloud." I sat, though every instinct told me to run, to get in my car and drive until Millbrook was nothing but a memory. But I needed to understand. "How much did you see?" she asked. "Everything. The frozen people, the figures, the thing that came into the attic." She closed her eyes. "You should not have survived. Anyone who is not a resident of Millbrook, anyone who is awake during the hour between 9 and 10 at night, they do not survive. But you are my blood, Oberon. That must have protected you somehow." "What were those things?" "We do not have a name for them. We have never named them because naming something gives it power, makes it more real. They have been here longer than the village, longer than anyone can remember. They claim this hour every night, and we have learned to give it to them without resistance." I struggled to process what she was saying. "You just freeze? Every night? You let those things walk among you?" "We do not let them do anything. We have no choice. At 9 p.m., every resident of Millbrook loses consciousness. We do not experience that hour. We simply cease to exist for 60 minutes. When we wake at 10 p.m., the hour has passed, and we continue with our lives. It has been this way for over 200 years. That is insane. Why do people stay here?" My grandmother's laugh was bitter. "Stay. Oberon, we cannot leave. Anyone who has lived in Millbrook for more than 3 months becomes bound to this place. If we try to leave, if we spend a night anywhere else, we die. The binding is absolute." I thought of all the times I had invited her to visit me in Boston, all the times she had declined. I had thought she was just stubborn, set in her ways, but she had been protecting me from the truth. How did this happen? Why does this happen? There are stories, legends, really. They say that the founder of Millbrook, a man named Ezekiel Thorne, made a deal with something he did not understand. He wanted prosperity for his settlement, safety from the harsh winters and hostile natives. What he got was protection, but at a terrible price. Every night, for 1 hour, the things that granted his wish come to collect. Collect what? My grandmother's eyes were haunted. Silence, stillness, the absence of life, even if just temporarily. They feed on it somehow, and if anyone makes noise during that hour, if anyone tries to fight or flee, the things take them permanently. I have seen it happen, Oberon. When I was a girl, a family visiting from New York got caught here after dark. They did not know about the hour. They tried to drive away when the things came. The car was found the next morning, but the family was gone. Just dust on the seats. Like the towel, I thought. Unmade, unraveled, erased. "You said I am protected because I am your blood. What does that mean?" She hesitated, and I could see her weighing how much to tell me. Finally, she spoke. "Our family, the Danes, we are descended from Ezekiel Thorne. The deal he made, the binding, it runs in our bloodline. That is why I have never left this village, why I will never leave. But you, Oberon, you were born outside Millbrook. Your mother escaped before you were born. before the binding could take hold of her child. You are free of it, but you carry enough of the blood that the things recognize you. They cannot touch you during the hour, but they know you are here. So I can leave. I can get out of here. Yes, and you must. Tonight, if possible, do not spend another night in this village. Every minute you stay risks the binding taking hold. 3 months is all it takes. I wanted to argue, to insist that she come with me, but I could see the finality in her expression. She was bound to this place as surely as if she were chained to the ground. I am sorry, she said softly. I wanted to tell you so many times, wanted to warn you about what we are. But how do you explain something like this? How do you tell your grandson that his grandmother is cursed? I reached across the table and took her hand. It was cold and fragile, the skin paper thin. I do not blame you, Grandma. But why did you ask me to come here? If you knew it was dangerous, why did you want me to visit? Her eyes filled with tears. Because I am dying, Oberon. The doctor says I have maybe 6 months, and I wanted to see you one more time. I wanted to make sure you knew the truth about our family before I was gone. I wanted to give you the choice I never had, to know what you are and to choose to stay free. The weight of her words settled over me like a shroud. She was dying, and she would die here, in this cursed village, unable to leave, even for her final days. There is more you need to know, she continued, about why those things are becoming more active, more aggressive. It has been getting worse over the past few months. The hour used to be almost peaceful, just a strange pause in the day. But now the things search more thoroughly, they linger longer. We think the binding is weakening. Is not that good? If the binding breaks, you will all be free. She shook her head. If the binding breaks without being properly ended, if the deal is broken rather than fulfilled, the things will not simply leave. They will take everything. Every person in Millbrook will be unmade, just like that towel in the attic, and the things will be free to spread beyond this village. We are not just cursed, Oberon. We are a cage, holding something terrible inside. The implications of that made my head spin. How do you properly end it? I do not know. If anyone ever knew, that knowledge was lost generations ago. I have been searching through old family records, through Ezekiel Thorne's journals and letters, trying to find some clue. That is why I needed you here. You are the only one who can search during the hour, the only one who could look through the documents while the things are active without being frozen or taken. I stared at her. You want me to stay here during another silent hour? I know what I am asking is terrible, but if we do not find a way to end this properly, hundreds of people will die, and whatever these things are, they will be loose in the world. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to refuse, to get in my car and drive away from this nightmare. But I looked at my grandmother, at this woman who had sent me birthday cards every year, who had taught me to bake cookies on my childhood visits, who had loved me unconditionally my entire life. She was dying, and she was asking me for help. If you have ever been in a situation where you had to make an impossible choice, where every option seemed wrong but you still had to choose, you understand what I felt in that moment. And if you have ever made a choice you knew might cost you everything, I hope you will take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Sometimes sharing these stories, connecting with others who have faced impossible decisions, is the only thing that makes them bearable. What do I need to do? I asked. Relief and guilt warred in my grandmother's expression. There is a safe in the basement, behind the old furnace. It contains all of Ezekiel Thorne's papers. I want you to go through them tomorrow night during the hour. Look for anything that mentions ending the deal, breaking the binding, or releasing the things. There has to be something there. There has to be. We spent the rest of that night talking. She showed me family trees, old photographs, documents that traced our lineage back to the founding of Millbrook. Ezekiel Thorne had been my great-great-great-great-grandfather, a man whose choices 2 centuries ago still echoed through time, still shaped the lives of everyone in this cursed village. I learned that there were currently 387 people living in Millbrook, down from a peak of nearly 500 in the 1952. The population had been slowly declining as older residents died and young people found ways to escape before the 3-month binding took hold. My grandmother estimated that within 50 years, there would be no one left. and she had no idea what would happen to the things when there was no one left to maintain the cage. At 11 p.m., exhausted and overwhelmed, I went up to the guest room, but I could not sleep. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow seemed to hide something terrible. I kept thinking about that figure in the attic, about how close I had come to being erased from existence. Finally, as dawn light began to creep through the curtains, I drifted into an uneasy sleep. I woke to the smell of breakfast cooking. It was disorienting, this return to normalcy after the horrors of the previous night. I made my way downstairs to find my grandmother making pancakes, humming quietly to herself as if nothing were wrong. "Good morning, Oberon," she said with a smile. "Did you sleep well?" The surreal domesticity of the scene was almost too much. "Not really, no," she nodded sympathetically. "The first night is always the hardest, but you will get through this, I promise." We ate breakfast in near silence. I kept glancing at the clock, watching as the hours ticked by. The day stretched before me like a prison sentence, every minute bringing me closer to 9 p.m. and another silent hour. "Can I go outside?" I asked. "Walk around the village?" "Of course. It is perfectly safe during the day. The things only come at night. Just be back by 8:45 p.m. at the latest." We need time to prepare. I left the house around noon, stepping out into a day that seemed aggressively normal. The sun was shining, birds were singing, and people were going about their daily routines. I saw the woman from last night walking her dog again, and she waved to me with a friendly smile. The dog wagged its tail. They had no memory of being frozen. None of them remembered the silent hour. Only I carried that knowledge, that terrible awareness. I walked through Millbrook, studying it with new eyes. It was a beautiful village, the kind of place that belonged on a postcard. White picket fences, neat gardens, tree-lined streets. Children played in a small park near the church. An old man sat on a bench feeding pigeons. But now I could see the cracks in the facade, the two bright smiles that did not quite reach people's eyes. The way everyone seemed to be going through the motions of life without truly living. This village was a beautiful prison, and everyone here was serving a sentence for a crime committed 200 years ago. I ended up at the church, a small white building with a tall steeple and ancient stained glass windows. The door was unlocked, and I slipped inside. The interior was cool and quiet, dust motes dancing in shafts of colored light. An older man in minister's robes was arranging flowers near the altar. He turned when he heard me enter, and his eyes widened slightly. "You must be Emma's grandson," he said, moving toward me with an outstretched hand. "Oberon, is it? I am Reverend Mitchell. Your grandmother has told me a great deal about you." I shook his hand, noting the strength in his grip. "She told me about the village, too." His expression grew somber. "Ah, so you know. That is good, actually. It makes things simpler. You survived last night, which means you carry the blood of Thorn. Your grandmother must be relieved. She wants me to help her find a way to end the binding." Reverend Mitchell sighed and gestured to a nearby pew. We sat together, the silence of the church pressing down around us. "Emma has been searching for that solution for 30 years, he said quietly. "She is not the first. Every generation has its searchers, people who refuse to accept that this is simply how things must be. But no one has ever found an answer. So you think it is hopeless? I think that some prisons exist for a reason. Sometimes the bars that hold us also hold back something worse. But I also understand the desire to be free, to break chains even if we do not fully understand what will happen when they fall. Do you know what those things are? Really?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I have my theories. I have read everything I could find about the founding of Millbrook, about Ezekiel Thorne and his deal. I believe he stumbled upon something ancient, something that existed long before humans walked this earth. Entities from somewhere else, somewhere that follows different rules. He offered them something they wanted, and they accepted. But deals with such beings are never simple. There is always a price, always a catch. My grandmother says the binding is weakening. She is right. I have noticed it too. The things linger longer each night, search more thoroughly. I believe they are testing the boundaries of their cage, looking for weaknesses, which makes what you are attempting to do both more urgent and more dangerous." "Dangerous how?" Reverend Mitchell met my eyes. "If you fail, If you make too much noise or draw their attention in the wrong way, they will unmake you. But if you succeed, if you actually find a way to break the binding, you might unleash something far worse than what we have now. Either way, you are playing with forces beyond human understanding. His words should have terrified me, should have convinced me to get in my car and leave. But instead, they strengthened my resolve. Because he was right about one thing. I could not just accept that this was how things must be. Not when there was even the smallest chance of freedom. I left the church as afternoon shadows grew long, returning to my grandmother's house. She was in the kitchen again, preparing an early dinner. "We should eat now," she said, "before the hour. It is better not to have a full stomach during the transition." The transition. Such a clinical word for what I had witnessed. Every living thing in the village losing consciousness, being forced into a state of suspended animation while those things walked among them. We ate in silence, neither of us hungry but both knowing we needed our strength. At 8:30 p.m., my grandmother led me down to the basement. It was dark and musty, filled with the accumulated junk of decades. Old furniture, boxes of Christmas decorations, filing cabinets stuffed with papers. The furnace sat in the corner, a hulking old oil burner that looked like it belonged in a horror movie. Behind it, just as she had said, was a safe built into the wall. It was old, the kind with a combination dial that had probably not been changed since it was installed. "The combination is 186237, she said. Those were the dates important to Ezekiel. His birth, month and day, the year he founded Millbrook, and his age when he made the deal. I memorized the numbers as she showed me how to work the dial. The safe opened with a groan, revealing stacks of yellowed papers, leather-bound journals, and loose letters tied with string. "Take everything upstairs to the dining room," she instructed. "Spread it out so you can work efficiently. You will have 1 hour, from 9 p.m. to 10 p.m. Use it wisely." We carried the contents of the safe upstairs, creating organized piles on the dining room table. Journals here, letters there, loose documents in a third pile. My grandmother lit candles and placed them around the room. "The electricity would work during the hour," she said, but candles felt more appropriate for what I was about to do. At 8:45 p.m., she hugged me tightly. "Whatever happens, stay silent. Do not make a sound unless absolutely necessary. And if something goes wrong, if you see them coming for you, hide. The blood of thorn protects you, but it is not absolute. Be careful, Oberon. What will you do?" "What I do every night. I will sit in my chair, and I will cease to exist for 1 hour. When I wake, hopefully you will have found something useful." She moved to her favorite armchair in the living room, settling in with a book. I watched as she tried to read, but her eyes kept darting to the clock on the mantel. At 8:55 p.m., I returned to the dining room and lit the candles. At 8:58 p.m., I heard my grandmother call out one last time, "Good luck, Oberon. I love you." "I love you too, Grandma." At 9 p.m., the church bell began to ring. I watched through the dining room window as the village froze. A cat that had been walking across the yard stopped mid-step. The branches of trees ceased, their swaying. Even the candle flames seemed to still, though they continued to burn. Then the hum began. It was just as terrible as I remembered, that low frequency that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. My teeth ached, and I had to brace myself against the table to keep from falling as dizziness washed over me. Through the window, I saw them emerge, the figures, flowing from shadows, materializing from darkness. More than last night. Many more. But I had work to do. I turned my attention to the documents before me, forcing myself to focus despite the unnatural hum. The journals were written in Ezekiel Thorne's hand, the ink faded but still legible. I started with the oldest one, dated 1803. The first entries were mundane: weather observations, notes about crops and livestock, complaints about the hardships of frontier life. But then, 3 months in, the tone changed. "I have found something in the woods," Ezekiel wrote. "A place where the trees grow in a perfect circle, and the ground inside that circle is always cold, even in summer. Strange symbols are carved into the trees, symbols that hurt my eyes to look upon. I feel drawn to this place, though every instinct tells me to stay away. The entries that followed chronicled his growing obsession with the circle in the woods. He began spending hours there each day, studying the symbols, trying to understand their meaning. He wrote of dreams where voices spoke to him in languages he should not have understood but somehow did. "They promised me protection," one entry read. "Safety for my settlement, prosperity for my people. All they ask in return is 1 hour each night. One small hour when we will not exist, when we will be absent from the world. It seems a small price to pay. The fool. The damned fool." I flipped through more pages, looking for anything about how the deal was made, how it could be unmade. But Ezekiel's later entries became increasingly cryptic, filled with symbols and strange diagrams that made my head hurt to look at. A sound from outside made me freeze. Footsteps on the porch, the front door opening. They were in the house. I remained perfectly still, barely breathing, as I heard them move through the first floor. They were searching more thoroughly tonight, opening closets, moving furniture, looking for something, or someone. One of them entered the dining room. I did not dare look up. I kept my eyes fixed on the journal before me, my muscles locked, my breath held. The figure moved around the table, its presence like a cold wind. I could feel it examining me, studying me. Then, very deliberately, it reached out and touched one of the candles. The flame went out instantly, then another candle, and another. One by one, it extinguished them, plunging the room into deeper and deeper darkness until only one candle remained. The figure paused, its void face inches from mine. I could feel its attention, its alien consciousness trying to understand what I was, why I was not frozen like the others, whether I was prey or something else. An eternity passed, or maybe only seconds. Time felt meaningless in that moment. Finally, the figure withdrew. It flowed out of the dining room, and I heard it climbing the stairs to the second floor. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn the pages, but I forced myself to continue reading, to search for answers while I still had time. In a journal dated 1815, I found something promising. Ezekiel described a moment of doubt, a time when he had tried to end the deal. "I returned to the circle in the woods," he wrote. "I brought offerings, trying to appease them, to convince them to release us, but they would not listen, or perhaps they could not hear me. I realize now that the deal was not made with beings who communicate as we do. They are fundamental forces, like gravity or time. You cannot negotiate with gravity. You cannot bargain with time. You can only exist within the rules they create." Despair filled me as I read those words. If Ezekiel himself, the one who had made the deal, could not end it, what hope did I have? But I kept reading, because what else could I do? In a loose stack of letters, I found correspondence between Ezekiel and someone named Dr. Albrecht Koenig, a scholar who apparently studied what he called liminal phenomena. Their letters discussed the nature of the deal, theories about what the entities were, and what they wanted. One letter from Dr. Koenig caught my attention. "You ask if the binding can be broken. I believe it can, but not in the way you imagine. The deal you made was not a contract in the legal sense. It was a transformation, an alteration of the fundamental nature of your settlement and all who dwell within it. To undo a transformation, one must reverse the process. You must return to the place where the deal was made and unmake what was done there." I read the letter 3 times, my mind racing. Return to the place where the deal was made. The circle in the woods. Could it really be that simple? But the letter continued. "However, I must caution you in the strongest possible terms. Reversing such a transformation while the entities are active would be catastrophic. The sudden breaking of the binding would release energies beyond human comprehension. You would need to perform the reversal during a time when the entities are dormant, when their attention is elsewhere. I do not know if such a time exists." A sound from upstairs made me look up. The figures were in my grandmother's room now. I could hear them moving through her things, searching. I glanced at the clock. 9:47 p.m. I had 13 minutes left. I frantically searched through the remaining documents, looking for anything about how to perform the reversal, how to unmake what Ezekiel had done. In the very last journal, dated just a few days before his death in 1853, I found it. Dr. Koenig's theory was correct, Ezekiel wrote in a shaky hand. I have determined how to reverse the transformation. The symbols carved into the trees are not mere decoration. They are the mechanism of the binding, anchoring the entities to this place, and us to them. To unmake the deal, one must destroy the symbols, all of them, in the correct order, within a single hour. But it must be done when the entities are not present, when their attention is turned away. He included a diagram showing the circle of trees and numbering each one, indicating the order in which the symbols must be destroyed. He also noted, I am too old and weak to attempt this myself. I have failed my people. Perhaps someday, one of my descendants will have the courage to finish what I began. If you are reading this, if you carry the blood of Thorn and wish to free us all, remember, it must be done in the daylight, when the entities sleep in whatever place they retreat to. And it must be done quickly, before they realize what is happening. Daylight. During the day, when the things were absent and everyone was awake and aware, I carefully tore out the page with the diagram and folded it, tucking it into my pocket. Then I began gathering the documents to return them to the safe. I needed to get everything back before the hour ended. A crash from upstairs made me jump, something heavy falling or being thrown. The figures were becoming agitated, their search growing more violent. I hurriedly scooped up the papers and journals, moving as quietly as I could toward the basement stairs. But as I reached them, I heard a sound that turned my blood to ice. Footsteps coming up from the basement. I had been wrong. One of them was already down there, had been down there the whole time, waiting by the safe. I froze at the top of the stairs, the documents clutched in my arms. Through the darkness below, I saw it ascending toward me. This one was different from the others, larger, more solid somehow, as if it were older, more powerful. It reached the top of the stairs and stopped, its void face tilted toward me. We stood there, separated by only a few feet, predator and prey assessing each other. Very slowly, I began to back away. 1 step, 2 steps. The figure matched my movements, advancing as I retreated. We moved like this through the kitchen, into the dining room. My mind raced, trying to think of what to do. I could not let it take the documents, could not let it destroy the knowledge I had just gained. The figure raised one long arm, reaching toward me. In desperation, I did the only thing I could think of. I threw the documents at it. Papers exploded through the air, journals tumbling, letters scattering. The figure flinched back, and in that moment of distraction, I bolted for the front door. Behind me, I heard a sound like wind through a tunnel, like the world itself howling. The figure was pursuing me. I burst through the front door and out onto the porch. The street was full of them now, dozens of the figures, all turning in unison toward the sound of my escape. But I did not care. Because as I looked up, I saw the clock on the church steeple. 9:59 p.m., 1 minute until the hour ended. I ran down the porch steps and across the lawn, the folded diagram still clutched in my hand. Behind me, the figures flowed in pursuit, moving with terrifying speed. 59 seconds. I ran past the frozen woman with her dog, past the halted cars, past all the paralyzed villagers who had no idea what was happening around them. 45 seconds. The figures were gaining on me, their forms blurring as they accelerated. I could feel their hunger, their fury at my resistance. 30 seconds. I stumbled, nearly falling, but caught myself and kept running. My lungs burned. My legs screamed in protest. 15 seconds. The church bell began to ring. A single deep note that cut through the hum. 10 seconds. The figures were right behind me now. I could feel one reaching for me, its skeletal fingers inches from my back. 5 seconds. I threw myself forward, diving onto the grass of the church lawn. The bell finished its toll. The hum stopped. I rolled onto my back just in time to see the figures retreating, flowing backward into the shadows, dissolving into darkness. Within seconds, they were gone, as if they had never existed. Around me, the village came back to life. The woman with the dog took another step, completely unaware that she had been frozen. The cars continued rolling. Everything returned to normal. Everything except me. I lay on the church lawn, gasping for breath, clutching the diagram that might be the key to ending this nightmare. Reverend Mitchell came running from the church. "Oberon, are you all right?" I could not answer. I just lay there, staring up at the stars that had appeared in the night sky, trying to process what had just happened. The Reverend helped me up and back to my grandmother's house. She was awake now, sitting in her chair with a confused expression. "Oberon, why are you so out of breath? Did you find something?" I told them everything. About Ezekiel's journals, about Dr. Koenig's letters, about the diagram and the symbols carved into the trees, about how the binding could be broken if someone destroyed the symbols in the correct order during daylight hours. My grandmother's eyes widened. "The circle in the woods. I know where it is. It has been there all my life, but we were always told never to go near it. Can you take me there tomorrow?" I asked. She hesitated, and I could see the hope and fear warring in her expression. Hope that this might finally end. Fear of what ending it might mean. "Yes," she finally said. "I will take you there at first light." Reverend Mitchell was less certain. "This is incredibly dangerous. If you destroy the symbols and something goes wrong, if the entities return while you are still there." "I know," I said. "But we have to try. You said yourself that the binding is weakening. If we do nothing, everyone in this village will die anyway when it finally breaks. At least this way, we have a chance." We talked long into the night, planning every detail. The circle was about 2 miles into the forest north of the village, in an area so dense with trees that sunlight barely penetrated. There were 17 trees in the circle, each carved with different symbols. According to Ezekiel's diagram, they had to be destroyed in a specific order. Start with the easternmost tree and proceed clockwise, saving the northernmost tree for last. "How do we destroy them?" I asked. "The symbols are carved deep into the wood. Fire," Reverend Mitchell said. "Burn the trees. It is the only way to be sure the symbols are completely obliterated. We would need gasoline, matches, and luck. So much luck." I did not sleep that night. I sat in the guest room, staring at Ezekiel's diagram, memorizing the order of the trees. 17 trees, 17 symbols. One chance to get it right. At first light, my grandmother, Reverend Mitchell, and I loaded supplies into my car. 5 gallons of gasoline, a box of waterproof matches, axes in case we needed to chop through thick bark, and a first aid kit, because we all knew things could go terribly wrong. We told no one else in the village what we were planning. My grandmother said it was better that way. If we failed, if something went wrong, at least the others would not have died knowing what they were losing. The dirt road that led into the forest was overgrown and barely passable. We parked as close as we could and continued on foot, carrying the supplies. The forest was dense and dark even in morning light, the trees so close together they formed a nearly impenetrable wall. "Stay close," my grandmother said. "It is easy to get lost in these woods. People have wandered in and never come out." After an hour of difficult hiking, we reached it. The circle. 17 massive oak trees stood in perfect formation, their trunks wider than 3 men with arms spread. Between them, the ground was barren, just hard-packed earth where nothing grew, and carved into each trunk, at about eye level, were symbols that hurt to look at. They were not like any writing I had ever seen. They seemed to shift and move when I looked directly at them, and they made my eyes water and my head ache. These were the anchors of the binding, the mechanism that had trapped this village for 2 centuries. "We should start immediately," Reverend Mitchell said, his voice hushed as if we were in a church. "We do not know how long this will take." I pulled out the diagram and identified the easternmost tree. It was marked with a symbol that looked like intersecting spirals. I approached it with a can of gasoline, my hands shaking. "Wait," my grandmother said. She pulled a small vial from her pocket. "This is water from the well that Ezekiel dug when he first founded the village. I thought it might help, somehow." A symbolic return to the beginning. She poured a small amount on the tree's roots, murmuring what sounded like a prayer. Then she nodded to me. I doused the base of the tree with gasoline, soaking the bark and the ground around it. The smell was sharp and chemical, completely out of place in this ancient forest. I struck a match. The tree ignited with a whoosh that made us all step back. Flames raced up the trunk, engulfing the symbol carved into it. I watched as the wood blackened and the symbol began to distort, to lose its shape. Then something happened that none of us expected. The ground beneath our feet trembled. "Earthquake?" Reverend Mitchell asked, but I knew it was not an earthquake. The entities knew what we were doing. Even in whatever place they retreated to during the day, they knew their cage was being destroyed. "Keep going," I shouted. "We cannot stop now." I ran to the second tree, doused it, set it ablaze. The trembling grew stronger. The third tree, the fourth. Each one we burned seemed to make the forest itself angry. Trees that were not part of the circle began to sway and crack. Birds erupted from the canopy, fleeing in all directions. By the time we reached the eighth tree, the sky had darkened. Clouds were rolling in, thick and black, moving far faster than any natural weather system. Thunder rumbled. "It is trying to stop us." My grandmother called over the rising wind. The ninth tree, the 10th. We were past the halfway point now, but the forest had become a maelstrom. Wind whipped through the trees with hurricane force. Rain began to fall, cold and heavy, threatening to extinguish the fires we were setting. Reverend Mitchell had brought a tarp, and we used it to shield each tree as we doused and lit it, protecting the flames until they were strong enough to survive on their own. The 11th tree, the 12th. Lightning struck a tree outside the circle, splitting it down the middle with a deafening crack. The smell of ozone filled the air. "This is too dangerous," Reverend Mitchell shouted. "We need to take cover." "5 more," I yelled back. "Just 5 more trees." The 13th tree blazed up, the 14th. The circle was more than 3/4 destroyed now, and I could feel something changing in the air. The oppressive weight that had hung over this place was beginning to lift. The 15th tree. That was when we saw it. A figure emerging from the forest, flowing toward us despite the sunlight. It was one of them, but different. More solid. More here. The binding was breaking, and they were bleeding through into the daylight. "Oberon, hurry!" my grandmother screamed. I ran to the 16th tree, nearly slipping in the mud. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the gas can. But I managed to pour it out, to light the match. The figure was getting closer. I could see others now, gathering at the edge of the circle, unable or unwilling to cross the boundary formed by the burning trees. One more. Just one more. The northernmost tree. The last anchor. I sprinted to it as rain lashed my face and lightning forked across the sky. This symbol was different from the others, larger and more complex. I poured out the last of the gasoline, drenching the tree. The figure in the circle was right behind me now. I could feel its cold presence, its alien hunger. I struck the match. It went out in the rain. I struck another. It too died before touching the gasoline. The figure reached for me. My grandmother threw herself between us. "No, you cannot have him. He is my blood. He is my family." The figure paused, its void face tilting toward her. For a moment, I saw something in that darkness that might have been recognition. Then Reverend Mitchell was there, striking his own match and somehow shielding it long enough to touch it to the gasoline. The last tree exploded into flame. The figure in the circle threw back its head and made a sound I will never forget. It was not quite a scream, not quite anything I can describe. It was the sound of something being torn away from reality, of a binding breaking after 200 years. The ground beneath us opened up. I do not mean it cracked or split. I mean it ceased to exist. Where solid earth had been, there was suddenly nothing. A void that reached down into impossible depths. We were falling. My grandmother's hand found mine in the darkness. I felt Reverend Mitchell grab my other arm. We fell together through a space that had no light, no air, no sense of up or down. And then, just as suddenly, we were lying on the barren ground inside the circle. The trees were gone, reduced to ash and char. The sky above was clear and blue. The forest around us was still and quiet. Reverend Mitchell groaned and sat up. "What happened? Are we dead?" "I do not think so," I said, helping my grandmother to her feet. She looked stunned, but unharmed. "We did it," she whispered. "The binding is broken. I can feel it. It is gone." We made our way back through the forest, which seemed less menacing now, almost welcoming. When we reached the village, we found people gathered in the street, looking confused and disoriented. "What is happening?" a woman asked. I just had the strangest feeling, like waking from a long dream. Over the next few days, the full impact of what we had done became clear. The residents of Millbrook began to remember the silent hour. All those years of missing time, of forced unconsciousness, came flooding back to them. It was traumatic for many, but there was also relief. They were free. After 2 centuries, they were finally free, and they could leave. The binding that had trapped them within the village limits was gone. Some people left immediately, desperate to see the world they had been cut from for so long. Others stayed, because Millbrook was still their home, just no longer their prison. My grandmother and I sat on her porch a week after the burning of the circle, watching the sunset without fear for the first time in her life. "What will you do now?" I asked her. "You can go anywhere, see anything." She smiled, and I saw tears in her eyes. "I think I would like to visit you in Boston, see where you live, meet your friends. I have 6 months left, Oberon. I want to spend them exploring the world I thought I would never see. Then that is what we will do. Before you think this story has a purely happy ending, I need to tell you one more thing. Sometimes the scars of the past run deeper than we know, and if you have stayed with me this far, if this story has moved you or frightened you or made you think about the prisons we all carry, I would be grateful if you would like this video and share it with others. Stories like this need to be told, need to be heard, because they remind us that freedom is never truly free. 3 months after we broke the binding, my grandmother passed away in her sleep. She died in my apartment in Boston, in a comfortable bed with sunlight streaming through the windows. She had gotten to see the ocean, visit museums, eat at restaurants she had only read about. She died free, and that meant everything. But her death was not the end of the strangeness. The night after her funeral, I dreamed of the circle in the woods. In the dream, I stood among the charred remains of the 17 trees, and Ezekiel Thorne stood across from me. He looked younger than I expected, maybe 40 years old, with tired eyes that held centuries of regret. "Thank you," he said simply. "You freed them. You finished what I was too weak to complete." "What were those things?" I asked. "What did you really summon?" He shook his head. "I do not know their true nature. I only know that I was desperate, and they offered me what I wanted. I thought I was being clever, thought I could control them, but you cannot control forces of nature. You can only endure them or break free. Are they gone? Truly gone?" Ezekiel smiled sadly. "From Millbrook, yes, but they exist in other places, other circles, other deals made by desperate people who thought they could bargain with the fundamental laws of reality. My advice to you, my distant grandson, is this: never make deals you do not fully understand. And if you must choose between safety and freedom, always choose freedom. Safety is often just another word for a comfortable cage." I woke with tears on my face. Over the following weeks, I stayed in contact with Reverend Mitchell and other residents of Millbrook. The village was changing. Some families left immediately, relocating to cities and towns they had only dreamed of. Others stayed but opened up the village to the outside world, welcoming tourists and new residents for the first time in generations. The church began holding services again with real enthusiasm, celebrating liberation rather than simply going through empty motions. Children who had grown up knowing nothing but the prison of the silent hour were learning what it meant to stay up past 9 p.m., to experience the full night without fear. But not everything was positive. Reverend Mitchell called me one evening, his voice troubled. "Oberon, I need to tell you something. 3 of our residents have died in the past 2 weeks." My stomach dropped. "How?" "Natural causes, supposedly. But these were healthy people, relatively young, and they all died between 9 p.m. and 10 p.m. I do not think it is a coincidence. You think the binding is not completely broken? I think that 200 years of forced unconsciousness during that hour changed people on a fundamental level. Their bodies, their minds, adapted to that reality, and now that the binding is gone, some cannot adjust. It is like bringing a deep-sea creature to the surface. The freedom itself is killing them. The guilt hit me like a physical blow. I had thought I was saving these people, but had I actually doomed some of them? Had breaking the binding been murder disguised as liberation? Reverend, I did not know. I did not think about. Stop, he interrupted gently. You gave us a choice, Oberon. For 200 years, we had no choice. Some of us cannot handle that choice, cannot survive in a world without the structure of the binding, but that does not make what you did wrong. It makes it complicated, which is what freedom always is. His words helped, but they did not erase the guilt. I had learned a hard lesson. Breaking chains is not the same as healing the wounds those chains created. Freedom is not enough on its own. People need time, support, and help to learn how to live without their cages. I started making regular trips to Millbrook, using my architectural skills to help rebuild and redesign the village. We tore down some of the older buildings that had fallen into disrepair, constructed a community center where people could gather and support each other through the transition. I worked with therapists from Boston who specialized in trauma, bringing them to the village to help residents process 2 centuries of stolen time. Slowly, painfully, Millbrook began to heal. It has been 3 years now since that night when I hid in my grandmother's attic and watched the creatures walk through frozen streets. 3 years since I learned that my family carried the blood of a man who made a terrible deal with forces beyond human understanding. 3 years since I set fire to 17 oak trees and broke a binding that had lasted 2 centuries. Millbrook is a different place now. The population has stabilized at around 300 people, a mix of original residents and newcomers attracted by the village's strange history. Yes, the story got out. You cannot hide something like this in the age of the internet. Millbrook has become a destination for people interested in the paranormal, in unexplained phenomena, in the thin places where reality bends. Some of the original residents hate this, hate having their pain turned into a tourist attraction. Others have embraced it, opening bed and breakfasts and giving tours of the forest where the circle once stood. There is no right way to process trauma, no correct way to move forward. We are all just doing our best. I still visit often. I have been seeing someone from the village, actually. Her name is Melissa, and she is one of the survivors. She was 18 when the binding broke, and she tells me that freedom terrified her at first. She did not know how to exist in a world where every hour was hers to control, but she learned, slowly. And now, she runs a small bookstore in the center of town. We were having coffee last week when she asked me something I had been thinking about for a long time. Do you think other places like Millbrook exist? Other deals? Other bindings? I thought of Ezekiel's words in my dream. Other circles. Other desperate bargains. Yes, I said. I think there are probably many of them. Small towns with strange rules, places where people do not go out after dark or avoid certain areas or follow traditions they cannot explain. Most people probably do not even realize they are bound to something. Will you look for them? Try to free them like you freed us? I considered this carefully. I do not know. Breaking the binding in Millbrook cost lives. It caused pain along with the freedom. I am not sure I have the right to make that choice for others. Melissa reached across the table and took my hand. But you gave us the choice, Oberon. That is what matters. Some of us chose wrong, or our bodies chose for us, but at least we had the choice. That is more than we had before. Maybe she is right. Maybe the choice itself is what matters, even when some of the choices lead to tragedy. I keep Ezekiel's diagram in a safe deposit box in Boston. Sometimes I take it out and study it, thinking about those 17 trees and the symbols that hurt to look at. I wonder what other symbols are carved in other places, what other anchors hold other people in other prisons, and I wonder if I will have the courage to break them. Last month, I received a letter, no return address, postmarked from a small town in Montana I had never heard of. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a hand-drawn map and a note. Our town has a tradition. Every resident must be indoors from midnight to 1 a.m. No one knows why anymore. We just know that those who break the tradition disappear. I found your story online. Can you help us? The letter sits on my desk now, weighing on my conscience like a stone. Part of me wants to ignore it, to tell myself that I have done enough, that I am not responsible for every cursed place in the world. But another part of me thinks of my grandmother, who spent her whole life in a cage, who only got 6 months of freedom before she died. I think of all the people in that Montana town, living with a rule they do not understand, losing people who dare to question it. They deserve the same choice Millbrook got. They deserve to know what binds them and to decide for themselves whether to break free. So, I will probably go. Not today, maybe not even this month. But eventually, I will pack my bags and drive to that small Montana town and start asking questions. I will search for circles in the woods, for symbols carved into trees, for the places where reality grows thin and desperate people once made deals they did not understand. And if I find them, I will face the same impossible choice I faced in Millbrook. Is it better to live safely in chains or to risk everything for freedom? I do not know the answer. I am not sure anyone does. But I know that my grandmother died with a smile on her face, having seen the ocean for the first time at the age of 78. I know that Melissa can stay up past 9 p.m. now, reading in her bookstore or having dinner with me or simply existing in the full richness of time. I know that the children of Millbrook will never know what it means to lose an hour of their lives every single day. That has to count for something. So, I will go to Montana. And after Montana, if there are others, I will go there too. I will carry Ezekiel's guilt and my grandmother's hope, and I will give people the same choice I gave Millbrook, to stay safely bound or to risk everything for freedom. Whatever you decide, choose carefully. Look around at your own life, at the rules you follow without questioning, at the traditions you maintain without understanding. Ask yourself, am I free or am I just comfortable in my cage? And if you find that you are bound by something you do not understand, if you discover circles in the woods or symbols carved in secret places, remember that freedom always comes at a cost. Sometimes that cost is worth paying, sometimes it is not, but the choice should always be yours. My name is Oberon, and I am 27 years old now. This is my story, the story of how I learned that safety and freedom are not the same thing, that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the ability to choose their own fate, even if they choose wrong. If you have made it this far, if you have listened to my entire story, I want to thank you. Sharing these experiences, connecting with others who understand that the world is stranger and more complicated than we usually admit, that is important. If this story moved you, if it made you think, please consider liking this video and sharing it with others. And in the comments, I would love to know, have you ever felt bound by something you could not explain? Have you ever had to choose between safety and freedom? Your stories matter too. The creatures of Millbrook are gone, dissolved back into whatever dimension they came from. The silent hour has ended, but the questions it raised remain, echoing through my mind every time I look at that letter from Montana. In the end, maybe that is the real horror. Not the creatures themselves, not the frozen time, or the unnatural hum. The real horror is knowing that freedom is possible but comes at a price, and having to decide, again and again, whether that price is worth paying. I think it is. I have to believe it is. Because the alternative is accepting that some cages can never be opened, that some people are meant to remain bound forever, and I refuse to accept that. So I will go to Montana, and I will find their circle, and I will give them the same choice my grandmother got. The same choice all of us deserve, to live free. Even if living free means risking everything, that is my promise to her memory. That is my inheritance from Ezekiel Thorne. That is the path I have chosen. The creatures did not like noise, because noise meant life, meant awareness, meant resistance. They fed on our silence, our stillness, our absence from the world. But we are not silent anymore. We are not still. We are here, we are aware, and we refuse to be absent. That is how you defeat the things that hide in the dark places of the world. Not with weapons or magic or ancient rituals, but with the simple, stubborn refusal to be erased, with the insistence that we matter, that our time matters, that our freedom matters. If you remember nothing else from my story, remember this: you are not meant to be frozen. You are not meant to lose hours of your life to things you cannot see or understand. You are meant to exist fully, in every moment, making your own choices and facing the consequences. That is what it means to be human. That is what it means to be free. And that, in the end, is worth any price.